Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. And today we're going to kick off a 5-video series where we're going to look at a sample I/O, and we're going to look at the student's entire process from the beginning, all the brainstorming and outlining and thinking, all the way to the final product.
That's great, Mr. Giles. Oftentimes we see sample recordings or we see some sample transcripts, but we don't really know how the student arrived to that final product. This series is meant to pull back the curtain, show you the metacognitive process, the steps he took to achieve a good I/O. Now, Mr. Giles, can we give us a little preview of exactly what we'll be doing today in video 1?
Yeah, we're going to first look at a sample menu of text and sort of talk about some of the different pairings we can make. And then we're going to actually look at the 2 texts that Paul chose for his I/O, and we're going to walk through some process that he made to develop his own global issue and identify that.
Yeah, I really like that. What do you say we take a look at the menu of text that Paul chose from?
That's great. Let's look at that.
Okay, and as we're looking at these texts, we want to think about, what are some of the global issues we see in there? What are some of the 7 concepts we see? And think about maybe the areas of exploration, how your teacher organized the course.
Yeah, and I think this is great for all the teachers to consider, is just get all the texts in one place and really do some hard thinking about these texts and how we can connect them.
Why don't you start us off, Giles, and make some connections?
I really like God of Small Things. If I were a literature student, I might connect that with Woman at Point Zero and talk about the way women are sort of rebelling against society.
Yeah, for me, I'm thinking about our students who do military service, whether they're Thai, Korean, or Israeli. They've really enjoyed Saving Private Ryan, and I think they've really enjoyed the things they carried, looking at sort of the experience of the soldier and maybe even post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, global issues don't always have to be problems. They can also be something positive. Mary Oliver is a poet who celebrates nature, and if you've seen some of our videos talking about her work, I really might want to connect that to Breaking Boundaries and that documentary about climate change.
Yeah, I think lastly, I've really enjoyed the graphic novel Fun Home. This is a character who's on a quest for her own identity and breaking free and really learning to love herself. And I think that maybe unorthodox is something similar, where we have an Orthodox Jewish woman trying to find her identity in Europe. I think there's some really cool connections to be made when I look at the menu of texts.
That's great.
So what did Paul eventually get to, Mr. Giles?
So Paul ended up on 2 texts that I think are really interesting. They're quite different. He chose Death and the Maiden. That's by Ariel Dorfman. That's a play that's from Chile. It's written in Spanish and also written in English. And that's compared to the Nike Dream Crazier campaign that we looked at.
Yeah, that one's by Kennedy and Whedon and Kennedy, I believe.
Correct.
And that's a really interesting advertising agency company. And when we look at these 2 texts, Giles, why don't you take Death and the Maiden individually and just think about what are some of the aspects of the ideas that you see in that play?
Yeah, and I think this process is great to go through all of the texts that you've studied. And this is, I think, a really good thing to do, maybe in groups, and to just break down.
Do it with your class, and really talk about the ideas you've studied together.
So Death and the Maiden covers a variety of topics. It talks a lot about marriage, because you have a married couple and some of the things that they've dealt with in the past. You also have the whole idea of mental illness and trauma. Paulina is a victim of abuse, and she's suffering from all kinds of paranoia and difficulties. It's also forgiveness and reconciliation. There's lots about gender and the way Paulina is treated. We also see it's about political prisoners and torture. And there's this whole idea of this cycle of violence that needs to be ended.
Yeah, when I think about the non-literary body of work, the Dream Crazier campaign, Mr. Giles, I think it's really about representation, trying to helping females find a more powerful voice. I think it really touches in the inequality and the differences and the discrepancies with respect to gender. There is a piece of mental stability in this one as well. I think, the Dream Crazy, it's sort of that playing with the word crazy and thinking about how that's an emotionally charged word, especially when referring to women, how that's not a nice term to use, emotional and crazy, and how by redefining that, you can empower and transform and redefine stereotypes. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
That's great. That's really interesting. So there's some good connections.
All right, so Paul has chosen Death and the Maiden and the Nike campaign. That's great that he's chosen that, but how do we get to a global issue, Mr. Giles? We've helped our students on numerous times with this process. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's the ladder of abstraction is a way for you to start with a line of inquiry and then slowly start to ask questions and slowly narrow down that topic to arrive at a global issue.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way to almost visually too, to see that step process where you're walking through and narrowing down a very specific
Yeah, folks,
idea.
you might want to go back and check our earlier video about where we talk about how to refine the global issue. We're going to use that same inverted pyramid right now and go through a process of questioning. You need a partner for this. I think it's really helpful to have someone you know, someone you trust, to ask you some really tough questions. So, Giles, I'll play the role of Paul, our students. Why don't you take me through the process?
So what would you say is a good line of inquiry to look at these two texts?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, this is all about power. In both Death and the Maiden and in the Nike Dream Crazier campaign, we see power being taken away from women and women really trying to fight to regain some sense of power in their world.
Okay, so why don't you narrow that down? What would be the next sort of area that you'd want to look at? What type of power?
Yeah, I think this is clearly about gender inequality. We can take that abstract word of power and drill down a little further. This is about women, and this is specifically about gender inequality.
What are they saying about women in particular? How, in what way are they unequal?
I just think they're looking at marginalization of women in different contexts. Obviously, the Nike Dream Crazier campaign, that's its current context, where Death and the Maiden's a bit before. So I want to look at the interplay of sort of stereotyping and context as I go through this.
Okay, and what more do these two texts say about women?
Okay,
putting them in a place.
I specifically remember, Paulina in Death and the Maiden being referred to as crazy or mentally unstable, and I think that's exactly what Serena Williams, Nike, and Whedon and Kennedy are saying as well, is that, hey, this idea of a women being crazy and emotional, it's not okay. And we have to sort of redefine that word. So I think I'm going to play with the words crazy.
That's interesting, that you're really getting at something a little more, that's definitely narrowing things down.
Yeah, I think in the end, Giles, I really want to think about how women need to redefine this word crazy and this notion of being emotional and sort of flip that into something more empowering. So why don't you say, Giles, why don't you read out Paul's global issue statement and see if we got there?
Yeah, that's great. This is what Paul arrived at, and I think this is really an interesting idea. Today, I'd like to discuss the field of inquiry, power, politics, and justice. More specifically, I'd like to address the perception that women are emotional or crazy, and how this demeaning language requires women to redefine traditional female stereotypes and seek empowerment.
Yeah, I really like that global issue statement that he came up with. I think he's got a lot of great things. I think I see a focus on language, this idea of the word crazy and people being emotional. And then I think he really captures the big ideas as well, where he thinks about redefining traditional stereotypes and trying to empower women. I think it's a really powerful global issue. I think the student's done well with this, Mr. Giles.
That's great. So our next video is going to then do what?
Well, I think once we have the global issue, Mr. Giles, we need to think about which extracts from both texts are going to support this idea. So why don't we save that for the next video, Mr. Giles?
Yeah.
And next video, we'll take a look at the extracts, do some annotating, and move further down the 5-video process.
Yeah, we hope this gave you a good idea of just how to ask questions, how to really think deeply about these texts, to, again, be open-minded about what kinds of topics you can explore, and then from that, you arrive at your nugget of gold.
We'll be dropping that video in about 2 days. In the meantime, students, why don't you go through this process, get your menu of texts out, do the thinking, go through the inverted pyramid or ladder of abstraction. We'll see you in about 2 days, and we'll take you through the rest of the process. Thanks for joining, everyone, and have a great day.
Bye, guys.